Okay, so chaos and destruction has come to the Call of Duty League and its franchises. It's an interesting time to be a player. It's one of these ones where I've seen all the players being dropped, and it was 45 players being dropped from their franchises, and most of it's happened today. Now, I'm not going to sit here and read off the tweets or, highlight some stuff and just tell you what's exactly happened. Most of you know, but what I think is more interesting is talking about why this may have happened and what it means moving forward. So, with the amount of players being dropped, it is somewhat obvious to me at the very least that there are a few reasons for this happening. One of which is obviously going to be renegotiation of these contracts, and that's interesting for the simple reason being is that we could see these same teams with the same players. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. I have, and I can't really go back on my word here because I've said it a few times on podcasts and publicly, I thought maybe that the salaries were too high in the Call of Duty League, and I understand why it happened in its inaugural season. And I think that's wise to give context to that. A lot of these venture capitalists and some of the franchises bid for players just straight out of the gate. They wanted the players, they wanted them locked down. Players were able to go around to these franchises and essentially just say, you know what, what's your offer? Can I get a better one? And just continually do that, right? Absolutely fine, all for players getting the bag. But I do think it pushed the average salary too high. Now, I'm not saying that this is all about cost cutting. It's also about building a roster that is good for the next year. And the thing about this is let's go back to the money thing. The contracts wise, a lot of them are on 1+1s. I think everybody's on a 1+1. And if a franchise chooses to keep that player without releasing them, they have to pay, I believe it just renews the contract for another year. So whatever they were being paid, whatever benefits, perks, whatever it is, housing allowance, any of that stuff, rolls on for another year. And if you don't think that you're getting your money out of that player, if they haven't justified their wage, or if you just think you can get a similar caliber player for less money, or even if they were just a pain in the arse during the year, you're not going to re-up that contract. So in essence, your contract with that player has come to an end, and that's why they're being released. And I think that's one of the big reasons we're seeing this happen across the CDL. Franchises are choosing not to re-up, right? Big factor in this, obviously, back down to 4v4, and 4+1 is what I've heard that it's going to be. And that means there is now going to be an abundance of talent. There is an awful lot of players that you could pick up, and that doesn't even include looking at the amateur scene. We've had some really good amateurs this year who've had great success. So if you're a franchise right now, you're sitting here going, I could build a competitive roster very easily. A lot of these players want to be in the league, because if not, they go into challenges, and no pro player worth their salt wants to go down into challenges. It's interesting. So franchises, the balance of power has shifted from last year, where players and franchises were desperate to get players, like, oh, we've got to get a big roster, we've got to make a big name for ourselves and build a brand, right? Players mean brand. To this year is, oh, we've already got established ourselves somewhat as a brand. Let's, now look at it. And these players want to be in the league. They know not being in the league is basically oblivion for some of them. So, well, now we have a little bit of gambling, and they can build one of these rosters for considerably cheaper in my mind. And I do think one thing that's being missed out from the timeline is that, and this is the best bit, right? All these releases, thank you for your work. You've been great. Sorry to see you go. All these graphics and stuff that's been made and they've been released today. There's probably negotiations for these players to come back as we're talking. That's why the players are not, too worried, I think. Some of them are already renegotiating contracts to go back to the same franchise. And it wouldn't surprise me. And also, some of these players have good brands, they'll go somewhere else. Kind of brings me on to my next point, though. Because if you're a franchise and you haven't had a successful year, and you haven't even won it, remember, bear in mind, right, 6 franchises won a homestand this year. 6 out of 12. So half of them have a roster that hasn't won anything. No matter how well they place at champs or anything. Haven't got a roster that's won anything. So what are you paying for? Do you think they're going to get better? Do you think that there is a higher skill ceiling for it? Possibly, but if you're a franchise, why take that risk? Why not just, especially with all these players flooding the market, and as more players flood the market, there is equal ample opportunity for it. I think we actually may see the best drafting of players yet, because now these franchises have bedded in. They've got staff that's got years more experience. They can, look more objectively at how to build a team from the very get-go. So GMs and coaches are now embedded and can have a good look. And for pro players, it's an interesting concept because it means you are now being really judged on your last year. No longer can you have a friend get you in if you've been a dick in practice, because that franchise won't want you. You're now kind of like, well, why are you not back here with this team? So you've got to be a little bit careful on what branding you do, what media you do. If anything, get your name out there more, because franchises will forget you very, very quickly. And I think also, and this is a harsh thing to say, franchises rebuilding these teams are probably well aware that a lot of players in the Call of Duty League, apart from the elites, are average or worse for a pro. That's the simple truth of it. There are a lot of players who are replaceable. There are. You might think these big players, these big names, oh, you last won a tournament a couple of years ago. Okay, what have you done for me lately? Oh, you've got a 1.01. Okay, well, so's this other guy, and maybe he's got a better brand, or maybe I can get him for cheaper, or I can build my team each way. It's unfortunate to say that, there are a lot of players who just sit in that middle bracket. And if you sit in the middle bracket, well, what's the reason for a franchise to keep you? They could say loyalty, but let's be perfectly clear. They're going for loyalty of place, like Atlanta or Chicago or, Paris or anywhere else. That's where they're trying to build up their core fans, and then they get the fans from the pros afterwards. The pros that come in are going to have fans anyway. So, and their brand has been built a little bit in the previous year, and they've got their branding out. They've had a good first year. A lot of these pros can just be replaced. And especially if you're on the lower end of the spectrum, goodbye, I don't need you. Maybe I'll have you as a sub if you've got a good enough brand. If not, why would you ever re-up a contract that, there are a dozen people begging to replace them, who could be cheaper, could be better, could have a better brand, any one of these innumerable things. Saying that, though, I do think it's a terrible time to be a professional player, and I couldn't imagine the actual turmoil they're currently going through trying to figure out what they're doing for the next year, because they've sat there on incredible money, they've had a great year, they've built a brand, a family, they've moved in some cases, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we're not paying you that for the next year, you're released. Like, well, shit, do I go back to that franchise? Am I going to be able to get more money next year? We have no idea what the luxury tax is this year either. It's a very interesting time. And I am quite looking forward to see where these teams go. I think we're going to see a few re-signings. When I've been talking to players and talking about it, I don't think we're going to see as many as possible. I think we might even see franchises wait to build a roster, and that sounds crazy. Or at least it would have done last year. Like I said before, the amount of players currently on the market means that towards the end of the signing, towards the start of next year and the next league, players are going to get a little bit desperate. And a player would 100% rather take a 50,000 contract or a very low contract to play in a franchise for one more year than go down into challenges. It is currently a buyer's market. Supply and demand are very much at play here. And it is crazy to see on the timeline the fact that these franchises have just ditched everybody. But I'm not surprised. This isn't something that's come out of the blue and I thought, oh yeah, that's not going to happen. These franchises have realised that they have a great opportunity to restart the clock here and build a more competitive team. Because a lot of these teams last year weren't competitive. And if that's the case, then if you've not got a team that's competitive and you're paying them a lot of money and you have options to completely change the roster from not only the amateur and challenger scenes, but also 40 to 50 professional players, are you going to pay your roster the same next year? It's a buyer's market. You cannot sit there and be surprised at any of this when you realise the implications of it. And I get a lot of people saying it's cost cutting. When I spoke to Hastro, he said a lot of people have already budgeted for next year. 100% true. Agree with him. These franchises have obviously worked out 5-year plans. COVID's probably not in those plans, but still, they've worked out their plans of what they're going to spend for it, and it's all been costed in. But they're still businesses. And if they can save some money and still get a good product out of it, if they can still have their investment and come back to them at a significant reduction in salaries, or even make a better product by picking up a new roster that can compete with the monsters on Chicago, Dallas, FaZe, who are the current top 3, then why wouldn't you? It's simple, it's obvious, it's a very easy thing for these franchises to do, which is why we're seeing, I think like Octane going back to the Surge is not a surprise. He's still a top prospect. People would have 100% picked him up. I think one of these franchises at the very least will be picking up Clay and building a team around him and allowing him to have a good amount of leeway, saying, hey, who do you want to play with, apart from Delos Empire? Who do you want to play with? It's simple. That's why the whole rosters are being dropped. If you haven't got a superstar, if you haven't got an X Factor, or you haven't got a franchise face of your brand, which is huge, then you're not going to be worth as much. It's just very easy and very simple for that. But I am looking forward to it because it's almost like a draft again. It's almost like everybody's starting from fresh, and there may be a little bidding war for players who are slightly above average and good to go in a franchise, and there'll be a reverse bidding war where players race to the bottom, just trying to slip in before that, that 4v4 slots are all filled up. Interesting time. But I thought I'd just go into my thoughts on this whole situation and Rostermania. Feel free to discuss in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't watched before. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.